Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Sciences, SOS, Certificate Program in Teaching of Primary School Mathematics, CTPM. LMT01 Learning Mathematics, English. Block 1 Approaches to Learning. Unit 3 Constructivist Approaches to Learning 3.1 Introduction. Suppose you are suddenly sent to live in a land of strangers. You don't know their language. Their way of dressing and behaving with each other seems strange to you. How would you cope with the situation? Would you look for somebody to tell you what to do? Or would you start looking more closely at this world too? See what signs people make to one another? You would try to attach your own meanings to a certain behavior, certain objects, a certain understanding of this world, its language, its code of behavior. You would construct your own understanding of this land and its people, not in one go, but continuously. This understanding would, of course, keep changing, depending on your contact with this environment. This is exactly the way children learn, from infancy on. According to people who follow the third model of learning that you briefly studied in Unit 1. In this unit we shall take you further from Sec. 1.5. To start with, we will talk about what constructivism means. To be able to explain and discuss it, I introduce you to some concepts that help in gauging the child's level of conceptual understanding. These concepts are schemes and schemas. Because of their specific meaning, these terms help us examine children's learning more closely. We shall then discuss the relationship between the environment of the child and what she learns. Understanding this relationship is very important for a constructivist teacher, as you will see in the unit. Throughout this unit, we stress the fact that children learn a great deal on their own. Adults, or more knowledgeable peers, are needed as a support to expose them to appropriate situations that will help them learn. This aspect will also be discussed at length while talking of the role of the teacher. Finally, we shall talk about the learning that takes place outside the confines of the school. It is important for a teacher to study the features of this form of learning for making the classroom a worthwhile experience for the children. Whatever we discuss in this unit is true of learning in general. Therefore, it is true about learning mathematics. This fact is explicitly brought out again and again through examples and exercises. Once you have studied this unit, please return to the following list of learning objectives to check if you feel you have achieved them. Objectives. 1. After studying this unit, you should be able to give examples of schemes, schemas, assimilation, accommodation, elaboration and scaffolding from your own experiences of teaching and learning mathematics. Explain what constructivism means in practice. Give examples to show how the environment of the child has an effect on what she learns. Explain the role of a constructivist teacher in helping a child learn. Give examples of ways in which the conditions in which informal learning takes place can be created in the classroom. 3.2 What is constructivism? In Units 1 and 2 we had a glimpse into the way children learn. Through several examples we made FHE point that a child needs to explore various aspects BFA concept through many activities of different kinds. The activities, of course, need to be interesting to the child. By doing these activities, and talking about what she has learned, she builds her own understanding of the concept. This, very broadly, is what the constructivist approach to learning is. Two of the pioneers who studied the way children learn have been Jean Piaget of Switzerland and L.S. Vygotsky of Russia. They observed children, built their hypotheses of how they learn and then tested their hypotheses. In the process they built up a whole theory of constructivism. We will, of course, not go into the details here. We only want to explore what constructivism means to us, as teachers, in practice. To do this, let us first understand how a child builds her mental image of a concept. 3.2.1 Schemes. From what you studied in AMT01, and from your own experiences, you would know that a child learns through repeated contact with concrete experiences. Also, each child learns in her own way, building her own mental image of a concept through her interpretation of her experiences. For instance, if she is learning to add, she would add small sets of objects to each other. She would do This with many different sets of objects. While adding, she would also be developing her ability to count. What she is doing is developing her ability to add by applying it again and again in different situations. In Piaget's terminology, she is developing her scheme of addition. Piaget defined a scheme to be a generalized action that improves by being repeatedly applied to similar situations in varying contexts. This generalized action is itself a coordination of several other actions. For instance, as you have just seen, a child's addition scheme uses her scheme for counting. And these two schemes further develop side by side through this interaction. Now, suppose I ask a class 2 child to add 5 and 3, and she says 8. Then I ask her to explain how she arrived at 8, which she does. Which part of this conversation would reflect her scheme for addition, her answer, 8, or her explanation of how she reached it? The child's answer is not important. Her addition scheme is made up of the thought processes she goes through for solving it. If she had said 5 3 is 7, she would still have applied her scheme for addition. So, a scheme of a child is the manner in which she acts. It is not the result of the action. An important point to remember about schemes is that two people of the same age and background may have different schemes for the same action. For instance, 5-year-old Mariel adds by counting on C block 2 of AMT01, while his classmate Charu adds by counting all. Their processes of applying addition, that is, their addition schemes, are different. As you know, learning is a continuous process. A child, from the day she is born, is learning. She learns to suck, to grasp, to pull, and develops many such schemes. Each scheme she develops is altered to fit new situations. For instance, have you ever observed what happens when an infant gets a ball for the first time? Let's assume that she has developed the technique of pushing some objects, like her bottle or a toy animal, and uses it on the ball. She finds pushing the ball a different experience from pushing the other objects. For the same kind of push, she possibly finds that the ball moves farther than those objects. Even if a weight is put on the ball slips from under it. She finds that the round shape of the ball also needs a different technique to grasp it. Through her new experience and the thought processes involved while undergoing it, she is assimilating the ball to her pushing scheme. In the process, her earlier scheme for pushing changes to a new pushing scheme which includes these new features. This process of change is called accommodation. In the process of accommodation, her scheme for pushing has got elaborated or broadened as it now has more features in it. The next time she plays with a ball, she will make use of the understanding she has developed with her earlier experience with the ball. The child's world of pushable objects has acquired new features. So, we have seen an example of the process of assimilation, the thought processes by which a scheme is used to act on new objects. Accommodation, the thought processes by which a scheme changes because of its action on a new object, and elaboration, the extending of the scheme due to accommodation. Assimilation and accommodation always go together. When we assimilate, we act on the world on the basis of what we already know about it. When we accommodate, we are responding to the world as a consequence of our actions and changing what we know. This is the process by which we learn. For instance, let us consider a child who has a scheme for counting and who is put in a situation where she has to add two sets. She would put the sets together and count. Gradually, her scheme for finding out how many altogether starts to be elaborated. She accommodates her scheme by beginning to count on. Now, when required to add two single-digit numbers, she may use the scheme of drawing a number of lines equal to the given numbers and counting them all, or drawing a number of lines equal to only one of the numbers and counting on. As she is given tasks of adding more and more numbers, she gradually develops a more sophisticated scheme for addition that can handle two-digit addition. This is further accommodated into a scheme for addition that has k over 2. After what you have read, you may have realized that the way a child's scheme of an action develops is by repeating the same action over and over again for long periods of time, using the same action on different objects, that is, assimilating these objects to her scheme. combining actions to produce new ones. That is, elaborating her scheme. Initially, new actions can happen occasionally, as if by accident. Later, these new actions are produced with a purpose and repeated over and over again in a variety of situations. Older schemes are not attempted as often, but whenever they are used, it is with confidence. Piaget noted that most children's actions have the features listed above. He suggested an explanation for these observations. According to him, when a scheme is developing, the child tries it out on various things again and again. This is a natural tendency to relate the scheme to other objects, to assimilate more things into the scheme. She wants to try out her new ability, repeating it over and over again in new contexts, or even in old ones. This repetition is not mechanical, and continues till the scheme has developed. It tapers off when there is no challenge left in it, and the child loses interest. For example, when children are learning to count, have you noticed how they love to use the number names in sequence over and over again? To count all sorts of objects around them, they count the number of steps they are taking, or the number of cars passing by. Nobody needs to tell them to count. They do so as if to satisfy an inner urge associated with the development of the counting scheme. Note that this is quite different from learning the counting sequence by rote. This need for practice stops on its own when the counting scheme is somewhat developed and the child gets bored with it. Of course, it will become part of her new schemes, like a scheme for addition. The important aspect of this exercise by the child of applying a scheme again and again is that while she is struggling with a scheme, she is finding many new ways of practicing it. This process of repetition with variety is part of the elaboration of the scheme. As she develops a scheme, she goes further to practice many schemes at the same time. This process is also part of elaboration. As you can see, elaboration is what helps us learn about the world. If this natural tendency weren't there, our schemes would remain very limited. 3.2.2 Schemas. Suppose a child sees a cat for the first time and is told that it is a cat. What feature of the cat registers on her mind? To start with, maybe it is the furry body. As she becomes more familiar with the cat and maybe reads or hears about other cats, her mental image of cat would include more features like 4 legs, drinking milk, chasing mice, fighting with other cats, long whiskers, etc. This would apply not only to one particular cat, but to all cats. Her mental image of cat has gradually got elaborated with more and more linkages and connections. Forming such a cognitive structure is called a schema. Constructivist approaches to _IHG. Definition: a schema of a concept is a diagrammatic representation of a person's understanding of the concept and its properties and relationships with other concepts. Like a schema of a concept varies from person to person. For the same person also, it does not remain the same. It changes as the person's understanding of the concept changes. For instance, in example 2, see, in Unit 2, the child forms a mental image of a dog. Gradually, the image changes and becomes more specific, but with more elaborate connections. As he generalizes further, he modifies his schema of dog to assimilate new experiences. To take another example, consider a child's idea of number. Initially, to her a number may mean only how many. She may have built this understanding through situations where, for example, she needs to give each person present one laddu. She distributes them, hesitates and thinks about whether she has more or less, and tries to check if she can give each person one and have some left for herself. Over a period of time, through other experiences, she is gradually building her schema for the concept of a number. In Fig. 3 we have presented parts of a schema for 7 of 2 children. Look at the screen. Fig. 3. The scheme for 7 of a 7-year-old Ahmed, b. 5-year-old Maksu. A schema, like a scheme, can accommodate and change to become more elaborate. For instance, the initial idea of number which develops from the ideas of 1-1 correspondence and the idea of 1 more can develop into an understanding of the elaborate system of numbers that mathematicians use, including not only whole numbers, but also fractions, negative numbers, irrationals, and complex numbers. See Fig. Point 4. Rigor, part of a class 11 student's schema of number. Now consider a detailed example of a schema being elaborated. Example 1. When Goody was 2 years old, she used to call all kites birds. Her schema for bird was essentially a small thing that flies in the air. So, she was assimilating kite to it. With this assimilation, her schema also accommodated. The shape of a kite is more regular than that of a bird. A kite flies in a different way from a bird. Sometimes you can hear a rustling sound when it flies and make out a string attached to it, which seems to control it. Her schema, which so far had only the feature, small things that fly, now added these new features which helped her distinguish between kites and birds. See Fig. Point 5. With this change in her schema, she now had two different objects in her schema of small flying things, birds and kites. Now Goody is about 8 years old, and you can imagine how much more complex her schema for flying objects has become. She knows about all kinds of planes, parachutes, rockets, satellites, flying lizards and bats. She also knows that there are birds that don't fly. Try mapping all that in a schema. You would need a very large piece of paper and pencils of many colors. Look at the screen. Fig. 5. A child's schema for small flying things getting elaborated. As you have seen, a child's schemes and schemas develop by assimilating and accommodating. So, what is the difference between the two? For instance, what is the difference between a scheme for division of numbers and a schema of division? A person's scheme of division is the chain of thought processes I goes through when dividing one number by another. On the other hand, a person's schema of division is a diagrammatic representation of her understanding of the concept of division, what other concepts she relates it to, etc. What we are trying to say is that the essential difference between a scheme and a schema is that a scheme is a way of acting on the world, while a schema is a representation of the world. We use different kinds of schemes to form schemas. For instance, consider how a child develops an understanding of whole numbers. As we have seen, she uses her scheme for counting to develop her schema of a counting number. She would also use her schemes for addition and subtraction to develop her schema of zero. So, a child's schemes develop for it by acting on the world through these schemes. She forms new schemes as well as schemas. The experience she gains from the action on the world helps her to gradually form more elaborate schemas, as well as a larger number of schemas. She forms more interconnections and gradually widens her horizons, becoming capable of attempting more complex actions. 3.2.3 Understanding Constructivism. From your study of Unit 1, you know that according to the constructivist model of learning, each child learns by interacting with her environment. She uses such experiences to build further understanding, developing her schemes and schemas. If you are a constructivist teacher, you would be able to judge how far each of your learners has developed her understanding by using, maybe informally, her schemes and schemas as devices for this purpose. For instance, a 4-year-old child comes into contact with numbers in several out-of-school real-life situations. You, as a teacher, would need to use this knowledge and build on it. You would need to create activities for the child that would help her link her understanding of number with pre-number concepts, and then help her build her concept of number. As her understanding grows, her schema of number would get elaborated. She would learn that every number also expresses a relationship with previous and subsequent numbers. For example, 3 is 1 more than 2, and 1 less than 4. Later, she would realize other properties and relationships. She would learn about related concepts, like the concept of division, through real-life situations of equal sharing or finding proportions. As you know from AMT01, and from what you have studied so far, a child in the concrete operational stage is able to act and reason successfully if she has real objects around to manipulate and reason about. Therefore, she requires opportunities through appropriate activities which deal with physical objects, to form and extend her schemas. Such opportunities is what a constructivist teacher would provide, carefully chosen learning experiences to help children explore and learn on their own, with a little bit of guidance on the teacher's part. We shall talk of this in more detail in the next section. But first, try the following exercises. So far we have looked at a description of learning in which the child is interacting with the world, acting on it as well as experiencing it. We have barely mentioned the role of teachers or other adults in the process of learning. You may think that this is because constructivists believe that adults are not needed at all to help children learn. This is not so. Adults are important, but in what role? Let us try and understand that. 3.3 The role of the teacher. Children as well as adults enjoy challenges and solving problems. Don't you? Enjoy exploring new ideas, gaining new experiences and acquiring new capabilities? So often, when we struggle with a problem, we don't give up. We continue enjoying the new challenge. We don't need someone to tell us that we are right or reward us, though that might be right too. We just feel good about having learned something more about the world in which we live, or for finding a new way of doing something. This feeling is a reward in itself. In this matter, adults and children are alike. If this is so, then how can we utilize this feeling to help children learn? In the following two subsections, we shall try and answer this question partially. 3.3.1 The social aspect. Have you ever thought about how different you would have been if you had grown up in Australia instead of in your hometown? Think about this. Also think about the difference if you had had different teachers, friends and relatives. You may have become more interested in sociology or biology than you are now. So, the social setting does influence learning a great deal. The importance of the social setting was first stressed by the child psychologist, Vygotsky. From his arguments, we can deduce that a child learns in the context of the experiences she has and builds on them. Right from birth she is steeped in these social influences. She observes and learns from her clothes, food habits, bathing patterns and other aspects of the socio-cultural atmosphere into which she is born. Her language is a tool that she uses to organize her thoughts and for communicating them to others. As teachers, we need to utilize the understanding that each child brings from her background. We need to build on the varied backgrounds our learners come from. Of course, there are several common basic concepts that most children know when they come to school. For example, they all know the difference between a small number and a large number of objects. They know some number names. They can compare sizes and shapes of some objects. You can add to this list. But, because of their social backgrounds, some children may come to the school after extensive exposure to books and may recognize numerals. Others coming from different backgrounds, like a vegetable seller, may not recognize numerals but would have experience of dealing with complicated operations on numbers. It is not enough to realize the fact of different backgrounds. To help learning take place, we teachers need to make the environment of the classroom comfortable for children, where they feel secure and wanted. This will help build their self-confidence. They would work and act in the same way as they are used to at home or in the playground, with freedom and under their own control. This would help nurture their intellectual development and help learning become interesting, instead of being a struggle. In such a classroom, you would move away from just telling children what to do, making them practice or testing them, to guiding and supporting them. The school would no more be a place where children feel they are being constantly tested or under scrutiny, so that they are afraid of making mistakes. You would help it change into a place where they can explore and learn with confidence. 3.3.2 Guidance. Suppose you give your learner a new kind of word problem in addition. She may want to solve it, but may not know how to begin. From her own previous experience, she may not be able to identify any scheme that she can use to understand the problem. Your presence could help in many ways. For example, if you read the question slowly to her, it may help her in absorbing the meaning of the problem. You could underline some words or draw attention to certain parts of the sentences which would help her discover the sense behind the problem. Or, You could ask the child some related questions and slowly help her take steps towards understanding the problem. As you can see, in this situation she is being able to do much more with you than without you. Your guidance is helping her learn. However, we have to make a distinction between guided learning and simply imparting information. If you solve a sum on the blackboard and your student copies it, would you say that guided learning has taken place? How much has the child learnt of what the problem requires and how to solve it? On the other hand, if you exph the problem and ask the child to talk about what she has understood, then she is likely to integrate it into her previous understanding in a meaningful way. For this to happen, you need to be aware of the child's level of understanding and to make sure of how to fit in the new knowledge with what she already knows. If you are a constructivist teacher, you would encourage each child to approach a problem in her own way. Through hints and suggestions, you would encourage her to build upon the conceptual structures that she has already built in her mind. You would not curtail her autonomy by presenting ready-made solutions to her. In the following example, we illustrate what we have just said. Example 3. I asked a group of children of class 2 to find the number of children who can sit in a classroom on 10 benches in such a way that 4 persons sit on a bench. The children solved the problem in many different ways. Some multiplied 110 by 4, others added 4 10 times or even added 10 4 times. A few multiplied I4 by 5 or added 4 5 times and then doubled whatever they got. Recognizing the diversity of approaches, I tried to help each child proceed in a way that fitted in with her thinking. Some of the children couldn't solve the problem. I knew that these children could count to 40 and further. So, I drew 10 benches and put 4 children on each bench. Counting the number of children on all the 10 benches LRZLPED them to see that 40 children could be accommodated. I read the problem with some of these children, analyzing each sentence with them, getting them to articulate the meaning of the sentence, and then slowly helping them to understand the complete problem. I helped them to pick up the procedure by asking them questions like how many benches are there? How many children on one bench? How will we now count how many children altogether? etc. I waited for them to analyze and understand each part of the problem before moving further. Continuing in this manner, helping the learners build on their earlier abilities, I could slowly encourage them to use the tables. As they became more efficient, they slowly internalized the process and could do the problems in their heads. We are handicapping a child if we just teach her to solve a problem by showing her the procedure and asking her to follow it. For instance, in the situation in example 3, I could have simply demonstrated the use of the multiplication table and obtained the correct answer. I could then have given them other problems of the same type and asked them to use the tables in solving them. Some of the children may even have understood why we do so, but others may not have. Though they would learn to give a correct answer, their understanding would be incomplete, and they may not be able to do problems that are worded differently. They would internalize the rules, but not appreciate in what situations these rules are to be applied. By elaborating the problem and making them think it out in stages, I am helping them break up tasks themselves and solve them. As you have seen, constructivist learning involves understanding and integrating, as opposed to rote learning and passive absorbing. Guided constructivist learning is a process which goes through several stages. Let us consider them one by one. Stage 1. Performance is assisted by a more capable other. The first stage is where the child is directly assisted by a more capable adult or peer. In this stage, the adult is working with the child and helping her discover what she knows and how it can be related to the problem that she has to solve. As is obvious, providing assistance does not mean telling the child what to do, but assistance is only in helping her to analyze the problem. She would discover the solution herself with the abilities she has developed. Sometimes this needs patience and time. Little hints and questions at this stage are helpful to the child in understanding the problem and subsequently finding a solution for it. Stage 2. Performance is assisted by the self-B. In the second stage, the child begins to assist herself in the same way that the adult did earlier. If she is given a problem similar to one she has done with the help of an adult earlier. She will TQY and do it herself. The adult only needs to point out the similarities with the earlier problem. She may go through roughly the same steps while solving it, except that these may be worded differently. This time round she would ask herself the questions that the adult would have asked her in stage 1 and try to answer them. Also, in this stage, children are assisting themselves to find the solutions to the problems. Stage 3, performance becomes automatic. This stage is reached when the child no longer needs help from outside to do the task and does not need to repeatedly stop and think about the next step. We may say that the child knows how to solve the problems. She can now solve all problems like the ones she is exposed to in stage 2. Stage 4, this process can be used over and over again for other activities. Once the child has mastered a certain kind of thinking and competence and reached the potential of development in one area, other areas begin to open up. For instance, her ability to understand multiplication as repeated addition and the use of the multiplication tables helps her to discover new patterns between numbers. She can now start to deal with factors of a number. Stage 4 can be described as the stage where the learning becomes a step and a support for the child to be used as a building block for more difficult problems. This whole process, where adults provide a support for the child to help them solve problems and build their understanding, is also known as scaffolding. As the child becomes more independent and confident about the problems, the adult gradually alters the extent and nature of the support. The first 2 stages can take a very long time, depending on the child and the quality of her interactions with the world and people around her. Also note that the learning of the child cannot be broken up into very neat categories. The stages described may have a lot of overlap. Summing up the stages, the important characteristics of guided learning are: 1. It involves the child and an adult or another child who is more knowledgeable about the task being learned. 2. The child's level of understanding and competence are important factors, which will guide the adult's activity. 3. The child does not passively do what the adult tells her to, but is actively involved in the process of understanding and discovery. The guide does not spoon-feed the child. The steps for undertaking the task are worked out jointly by the child and the adult, based on the child's understanding and the adult's knowledge. 4. The intention of the adult is to help the child to take control of the situation and to be finally able to accomplish the task independently. Note that through most of our discussion on guidance, we have spoken about the guide being an adult. This need not be so. In fact, it could be any person, adult or child, who has a greater understanding of the ideas being discussed. It is important that this be understood, because children lean so much from each other. Another category of very good guides for us to learn from can be well-written books. For instance, look at one such guide, namely, your course material. This XPBSEs you to some ideas, sets you some tasks and supports you in your struggle. To explore the ideas presented. For an adult, other books that are not even prepared as self-learning materials can act as guides in different ways. You may read about a couple of ideas and become curious about them, or you may see some ink and want to understand it. In both these situations you would try and find books that you can understand and use them to find a answer to the question. You would need to find a book that begins with something that you know and helps you formulate an answer to what you want to know. Let us, now, consider why some children who are adept at doing calculations outside school fail miserably at mathematics when they are in school. In the next section we will dive and look for some answers, and see how to use the answers to teach the children better in school. 3.4 Characteristics of Informal Learning. In Unit 2, you have seen several examples which show the kind of learning a child displays even before she comes to the school. You have seen that one important component of out-of-school learning is the meaningfulness of the situation in which learning takes place. Regarding the impact of this component, many years ago a Russian psychologist did a simple experiment with children's memory. Some children were given a list of items to memorize, and then tested to see how many of the items they could remember. Then the experimenter created a game. for the children to play, where one child became a shopkeeper and the other children were the customers. The customers were then given the same list of items that the children had earlier been asked to memorize, but this time in the form of the items they needed from the shop. Once the children got the list as articles to be purchased and they had to go to the shop to buy these articles, it was seen that they could remember the list much better than before. They now had a meaningful context, a purpose for which they were remembering. Since this made sense to them, they could memorize the same list more easily. This point is also made in the following example. Example 4. Shakil is a 10-year-old who sells newspapers on the streets of Delhi. He does this with his two older brothers to supplement the very small income of his father, who is a laborer in the city. Here is an interview I had with Shakil about his ability to deal with buying and selling. I. How many newspapers did you get today? Shakil. 20. I. How much will you sell them for? S. For 30 rupees. Because each paper is sold for 1 rupee 50 paise. I. So, how much profit do you make? S. 5 rupees. Because we keep 25 rupees for buying tomorrow's papers. I. And if you sell only 10 papers? S. Then, I will only make half of that. I. And how much is that? S. 2 rupees 50 pi. I. But, if you have bought the papers for 25 rupees, won't you be losing money? S. No. It means less profit because I can return the newspapers to the newspaper agent and he will give me tomorrow's papers. If I can sell all of them, it's better. We make 5 rupees. I. What will you do with the 30 rupees? S. I give it to my brother. He'll keep the money for tomorrow's papers and give the rest to the family. But sometimes he lets me keep some change to buy something for myself. While discussing how the children learn all these skills, I found out that when the children first start selling newspapers, they work under the supervision of an older sibling or a parent. Each child is initially given a very small number of papers, which is slowly increased. The child also does not initially buy the newspapers herself. They are bought for her till she can learn to handle money, until she gets accustomed to the prices. While talking to the adults and children in Shakil's family, I discovered that in all this interaction the child is neither underestimated nor asked to imitate the adult. Some general points may be discussed, but then the child is free to act in her own way and also to take independent initiative, discovering new ways of approaching the customer. There is a confidence that the older siblings have in the ability of the child to learn. Even though the comments on her performance may be caustic, they are not denigrating the learner or humiliating her. What this example clearly illustrates is that when a child understands the purpose of an activity and is an active participant in it, the rules and the logic of the activity begin to make sense to her. This helps her to learn the concepts involved. For Shakil, calculating profit, loss and the prices of newspapers is not just a mental exercise which comes out of a textbook. He is in the street, participating in the buying of the newspapers from the agent. Then he tries to ensure that he can sell as many as possible because the money is needed by his family. Compare Shakil's situation to that of Neetu, a 12-year-old child studying in Class 5.1 asked her to solve the following problem from a school textbook. A shopkeeper buys 10 pencils for 1 rupee and 50 paise each. What will be his profit if he sells them for 2 rupees each? Netta's response, after a lot of thinking, was, "Do I add or multiply? If you tell me that, I will do it." For Neetu the problem is an abstract one in which she knows she must apply certain rules. However, the logic of the rules does not have any real meaning for her. Therefore, she is at a loss of how to proact. Our classroom processes need to be built around situations and materials from the children's daily lives. We also need to find ways of relating the textbook materials to the child's way of thinking. Doing this would certainly help children cope with schoolwork more easily. A second characteristic of learning outside school is that it takes place in a socially supported context. The learning is guided by others who are more knowledgeable and who do not underestimate the child. In example 4, we see that Shakil is not just given a lesson on the cost price and the selling price of the newspaper. He is carefully trained to handle money and to begin to participate in the activity of selling newspapers. The more capable adults or children allow him to find new ways of doing his task. They never try to humiliate him or decrease his self-confidence. Another very commonly found situation of informal learning of arithmetic skills is through the numerous games the child engages in. Children at play often keep track of scores, which helps them develop their counting scheme. This process is helped by other children keeping a check. If one child counts wrong, several others will correct her, and slowly the child's own skills improve. The apprenticeship in games helps children acquire skills under the supervision of other children. Just as in the case of learning to sell newspapers, the presence of skilled guides becomes an important support and source of knowledge that the child can draw upon. From the examples we have discussed, you may have realized a third characteristic of out-of-school contexts. This is learning while doing. In schools, the emphasis is much more on transmitting knowledge and skills through the spoken or the written word. Classroom teaching seldom integrates the child's own experiences with what is taught in S.Q1. In fact, in AMT01 and this course we are aiming to help you learn about children by doing exercises and activities with children. Let us briefly write down the important characteristics of informal learning. What we have seen is that in informal learning situations, 1. The context is closer and related to the child. 2. The child sees a purpose in learning the concept L process, skill 1. 3. She participates actively in the process and is in partial control of the interaction. 4. The adult or peer who guides the child is sensitive to her and her errors, and respects her abilities. The models and examples of informal learning that we have considered can help us to be better teachers. They suggest an approach that may encourage children to learn, but this does not mean that things can only be learnt in informal situations. In fact, if you have done L5E, you would realize that the out-of-school learning is limited to the experiences that the person has. For instance, Shakil of example 4 is quite likely to have difficulties in even adding or multiplying numbers that he is not used to dealing with. This is where the role of formal learning comes in, to help the learner generalize the concept she is somewhat familiar with.